After the unexpected meeting of top European politicians in Kyiv on Saturday, the message to the Kremlin was clear. Putin, the countdown has begun. Europe and Ukraine called for an immediate ceasefire starting Monday, May the 12th, for at least 30 days. Otherwise, Russia would face drastic consequences, tougher sanctions and massive military support for Ukraine. But, unsurprisingly, Russian President Putin rejected the proposal and instead relied on delay tactics through token talks in Istanbul. In today's video, we will take a deep dive into the so-called peace process of recent days. What's really behind Putin's delay strategy? Why will peace talks in Istanbul lead nowhere? And could this be Putin's biggest mistake yet? These are the questions we'll tackle. While Putin held a major military parade on Friday to celebrate Victory Day, essentially using it as a propaganda show for the war, in Kyiv, tough political demands were being made. The heads of state from Germany, France, the UK and Poland had traveled to Ukraine to join President Volodymyr Zelensky in delivering a clear call for peace. The outcome of the meeting was that both Ukraine and Europe demanded an unconditional ceasefire from Russia starting Monday, that was yesterday, as a foundation for peace talks. This wasn't just a European initiative, though, as the idea of a ceasefire also gained support from US President Donald Trump. Should Russia reject this offer, the Europeans warned of serious consequences, such as tougher sanctions and additional military support for Ukraine. But unsurprisingly, Russia quickly rejected the proposal. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made it clear that Russia would only agree to a ceasefire if Ukraine halted weapons shipments from the West during that period. Meanwhile, Russia would continue to produce weapons and receive materials from North Korea and Iran. Putin's loyal follower, Dmitry Medvedev, took it even further, saying in a post on X, formerly Twitter, that the Europeans could shove their ceasefire where the sun doesn't shine. However, it's crucial to point out that Russia didn't just flat-out reject the ceasefire offer. Putin had a counter-proposal. He suggested peace talks in Istanbul, starting on May 15th without a ceasefire, allowing the killing to continue in Ukraine in the meantime. This offer has sparked heated debate between both sides. While Putin insists on talks first, Europe repeatedly emphasized that there can be no talks without a ceasefire. The US Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, made it clear on X. First, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, and then, during this time, transition to full peace talks, not the other way around. While the European and US messages were clear, there was a shift in Washington yesterday, as Donald Trump surprisingly announced on Truth Social that Ukraine should accept the offer for talks and speak with Russia on Thursday. Trump's stance essentially sides with the Kremlin's proposal for talks, despite Russia not implementing a ceasefire yesterday. However, Ukraine hasn't been swayed by this political spectacle. President Zelensky has again proven that Ukraine is interested in peace, even though he still demands an immediate ceasefire. Zelensky responded to the proposal with a strong statement. "We expect a ceasefire starting tomorrow, a complete and long-term one, which will create the necessary foundation for diplomacy. There's no point in prolonging the killings." He added, "I will be in Turkey on Thursday to wait for Putin. Personally, I hope the Russians won't find any excuses to avoid coming this time. For now, it's clear that talks in Istanbul seem more likely. But the reality is that they are, with near certainty, just another delay tactic from Russia, and the chances of success are slim. Let's take a closer look at why these talks are likely to fail. While we don't know yet if Russia will send a delegation to Istanbul on Thursday, or if Putin himself will attend, it's worth examining the potential talks and their likely futility. These won't be the first peace talks in Turkey. There were negotiations back in 2022, just days after the war began, but those failed quickly. And now Russia wants to resume them based on the 2022 talks and the current situation on the ground. Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov said that Russia plans to resume peace talks with Ukraine in Istanbul, starting May 15th. But here's the twist. As mentioned, Russia is referring to the talks of 2022 as the basis for future discussions, where they essentially demanded Ukraine's surrender. During those talks, Russia insisted that Ukraine disband its military, eliminate its air force, limit its tank and artillery capabilities, and refrain from buying weapons from Europe or the US. The Ukrainian army would have been reduced to a force of only 100,000 soldiers, effectively transforming Ukraine's defense into a lightly armed police force, incapable of defending against further Russian aggression. Adding to this insanity, Ukraine discovered Russia's war crimes in Bucha, which killed the talks once and for all. Now, Russia wants to go back to those talks, but they've only upped their demands. Russia now seeks to have the 4 annexed regions, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk, recognized as part of Russia, and they're calling on Ukraine to withdraw from these territories. To summarize, whether or not these talks happen, there's little hope for success. Russia is unlikely to change its maximalist demands and suddenly seek a just peace. Ukraine will not sign a capitulation agreement in Istanbul. The war is set to continue, most likely for weeks or months ahead, and that could be Putin's biggest mistake yet. It's well known that both Russia and Ukraine are suffering from this war of attrition. The Russian army is facing mounting problems and its resources are thinning out. Analysts believe Russia can't sustain this war much longer, with some predicting a collapse as early as late 2025 or early 2026. While Ukraine knows it doesn't have to hold out forever, every day of war is a problem for Kyiv. The pressure is mounting, and Ukraine's top priority must be to weaken Russia even further to make the collapse come sooner. Putin's stubbornness regarding peace talks could be exactly what makes that collapse happen faster. Europe and the US have already announced that if Russia doesn't agree to an immediate ceasefire, there will be serious consequences. France has warned of further sanctions, while the UK's Keith Starmer and US officials have made it clear they are ready to increase military aid to Ukraine. Germany, led by Chancellor Friedrich Merz, is also taking a firmer stance. The German government announced it will no longer disclose details about military aid to Ukraine, aiming for strategic ambiguity to avoid giving Russia a tactical advantage. This means that weapons like the Taurus missile might be secretly delivered to Ukraine, and crucial Russian infrastructure, like the Crimean Bridge, could soon be receiving unwelcome visitors from the air. If Europe and the US follow through on their threats, Putin's reckless behavior could end up costing Russia dearly. Russian military operations are already stretched thin, and any more support to Ukraine could prove to be more than Russia can handle. If Putin had agreed to a quick peace back in March, Russia might have retained all the territory it had captured. But his refusal to compromise and his insistence on maximal demands could very well prevent him from ever achieving that. Even US politicians like J.D. Vance, traditionally critical of US support for Ukraine, have had enough of Russia's demands. The shift in Washington's stance shows that even skeptics are starting to understand that Putin's maximalism is unsustainable. To sum up, peace in Ukraine is nowhere in sight due to Putin's stubbornness, and even potential talks in Istanbul will most likely go nowhere. This ongoing standoff could be the final blow for Russia, as Europe and the US are slowly running out of patience with Putin's delay tactics. What do you think? Will there even be talks on Thursday? If so, do you agree that they're doomed to fail? Or might we see a surprise? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates. See you soon.